Oh, the Senate has passed the coronavirus relief bill, but what is in it? Today, we're talking to HuffPost reporter, climate reporter Alexander Kaufman about one specific aspect of the bill. What's at stake for the climate crisis? Progressives are calling for bold moves to phase out fossil fuel industries and support clean energy in their place. We'll get Alexander's take on whether that is likely to happen. If you've been watching this show, you know that Alexander is a regular contributor here. He is a reporter at the Huffington Post, writes about climate change, environmental policy, and the politics of life on a warming planet. Alexander, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really enjoying how like news is just people like in their bathrobes now. Not you, but I mean, we
I, you know, I, I thought about putting a blazer on, but I was like, nah, I'll keep it real for the audience.
did.
I actually saw somebody, tweeting about that in very earnestly, and I thought it raised a very good point, which is that, by showing people like this, not made up, in their homes, and quite frankly, not just in a studio in New York, it's been a very democratizing experience for television in general, which I think is probably a positive thing to happen.
I think so too. And I'm kind of like, hey, I've been here this whole time in my sweatpants, and we put this up, and we're probably looking more professional than most of the people on MSNBC are coming from. I really, really thought I saw someone coming from their bathroom. I'm not even kidding. It was like, that is the bathroom mirror behind this person. Maybe
I
they
mean,
have
I'm
a small
I'm in
space.
my living room, but I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens, so my bathroom is just that way. So
But
not
yeah,
far.
Queens. So you're in the epicenter, as it turns out.
I am.
How's the epicenter treating you today?
Well, I have, since the last time we spoke, I think was 2 weeks ago on a Thursday. That following day, I went into quarantine. My partner urged me not to go into the city anymore, and I obliged. And I have been, I've only left my apartment maybe 3 times since, to pick up some additional groceries and to drop off some laundry. And yeah, I mean, I've gone out to check the mail, but it's I was quite disturbed last week. The couple of times I did go out, by the sheer volume of people I still saw on the street. I live in Astoria, um,
Mm.
right near 30th Avenue, which is a big commercial area, lots of stores, lots of food stores in particular, which I can understand would be busy, but I was alarmed by how many people were out and about moseying around. It wasn't a harried shopping experience. It was people acting like it was a normal day. And I'm young
Are they
and
wearing masks, Alexander?
some, but not enough. And so it was very concerning. And so I've tried to stay in, and now that it's been 2 weeks, I have not exhibited symptoms of anything, which I'm very grateful for. But I live not far from the Mount Sinai outpost here, and I have gone to sleep every night listening to an unusual number of ambulance sirens, and I have woken up every morning to an unusual number of ambulance sirens. And by reading the accounts in a lot of the hospitals around Queens, that's no coincidence.
Yes, I live right near a Presbyterian here or what was once Methodist, is now Presbyterian here in Brooklyn, about 3 blocks away. And I too am hearing an unusual amount of sirens. Yeah, so that's definitely a thing.
I have never been more grateful to live on the ass end of Queens than I do now. I'm in that part of Queens where other people from Queens go, "Oh, that's far."
You're in Meeks. Are you in Gregory
Lakeside.
Meeks district?
Yeah. I'm out here in glorious South Jamaica, my little hamlet of Baisley Park, right by Kennedy Airport, and people in Astoria are like, "Oh, that's Jersey." I mean, it's crazy.
I grew up on Long Island, so that's still
Okay, yeah.
better than where my parents are.
So yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm right on the border. I
Yeah.
actually consider myself more of a Long Island girl because we would go in that direction for
Yeah.
shopping and
Yeah.
all of
Go
that
to the
stuff. So
mall. Yeah.
In
yeah,
the
it's
mall.
closer. It's so much closer. But I also had to have a car sooner if I wanted to go the other direction to the city and Jersey. And so no one visits here. I always had to go visit.
No.
Now everyone's like, "Wow, you're far. Are you putting anybody up?" No,
Oh,
no,
Well,
I
please,
am not.
please,
uh,
everybody, all the New York transplants who have like only been in, south of 34th Street and then only in some neighborhoods of Brooklyn. Astoria is like a schlep for them. So
I love
I can't even
Astoria.
imagine trying to convince some people to come elsewhere.
So,
Wow.
Alexander, one of the things I know that we're here to talk about sort of the hard facts, but I do like the fact that you write about the politics of life on a warming planet, and that fact that people are kind of meandering and walking around outside the streets of Astoria. How much of that, I think people, the narrative I'm hearing is like, people are terrible, they're still going outside. But I think that there is a part of it that is, the narrative of what's being asked of us is unclear. So when the government says, well, you can walk around outside for mental health, stay 6 feet away from people, but it's fine, you can do that. And now all of a sudden they're sending cop cars to Prospect Park to like make big announcements that everyone must stay away. And then de Blasio is considering closing the parks. I think governments wanting to shy away from coming down with an authoritarian fist, you can't leave your house or you'll be prosecuted. And then they're also at the same time doing some public shaming of people who are doing what they said they could do, go outside and walk around. You know, I don't see people hanging out in big bunches. Most people are just with themselves or with one other person walking. What are your thoughts on my perception there?
I understand what you're saying. People need guidance. People need guidance. I mean, that is abundantly clear. And I think it is a profound failure of leadership to account for that. I mean, look, there's all we all like to joke about the New York hustle and the grind that is innate in anyone who grows up here and lives here, but then also is just trying to survive here, given how expensive it is to live here. And when you are faced with the economic consequences that we already understood were going to come of this so quickly, and you know that at a certain point some rule is going to come down, it's going to get too bad at some point for you to go out. What are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do when there's no freeze on the rent? They took
Yeah,
a
why is
while.
there no freeze on the rent? Why do people not have to pay their mortgages, but we still
Right.
have to pay the rent?
Right. The utilities may be suspending, disconnects for non-payment, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to get a bill for it later. So if you are faced with that, and if you are one of the millions of people in this city and in this country who knows that you have to make a choice between whether there's food in your fridge or whether there's medicine in your cabinet that you need or whether the lights can go on, like you're going to be out doing everything you can to make that money and to try to survive until you are told that you can't. And so the idea that somehow, providing it as an option and giving people that choice will lead people to the rational decision, the safe decision, is absolutely delusional, and it's emblematic of the kind of philosophy that we've been governed by economists and people for so long, that just kind of believe in this idea that, if we just give people all the rational facts, they will make all of the rational decisions and the economy will work exactly as the models predicted. But that isn't how human beings actually function. And the failure to account for that, particularly in this city and the culture that we have and the expenses that we have to survive here, I think is borderline murderous.
Well said. And I think the blame and suggestion that the people who are out in the world doing things like that are being selfish. I think that's media hype in
What are
certain.
they supposed to do? What are they supposed to do? I mean, like without clear direction, without somebody to say, this is what needs to be done, while at the same time you have a president who has exhibited, a tenuous relationship to the facts at best, going out there and saying, oh, this is contained. Oh, this isn't going to be a problem. And then suddenly we are the epicenter of it. And already the conversation is about, well, it would be worth it to sacrifice your grandparents so that we can get people
Oh,
back to work sooner than
Yes.
later. These are the same people that 10 years ago when Obamacare was first passed, this neoliberal policy that everybody has to buy, insurance, that there was going to be death panels that were going to decide who lives and dies. Now that is literally under discussion from these people. And I just,
When are they going to come around to understand that collectivism is actually kind of important sometimes? This idea of personal freedom, there is a limit to it, or at least a responsibility that's part of it.
well, I think that this crisis uniquely lays bare that situation. I mean, I've been trying to argue this about climate change for years, to varying
Yay,
degrees
we
of
finally
success.
did it.
But I think when you look at the success in some countries, particularly in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in South Korea, at containing this virus early on, it demonstrates that stringent rules, central organizing, and an ability to think beyond individualism as expressed by consumer choice is actually quite a good thing.
In our chat here on our Twitch page, Carpe Pack says, why are businesses providing essential services still allowed to sell at retail level? No one should should profit during this or at all or on vital needs.
Well, uh, you know,
Welcome to America.
yeah.
And
Pandemic profiteering.
that's exactly it. We've had how many generations raised on pure capitalism, which is not a community mindset at all. So other nations are of course doing a little bit better than us. This is a complete and total mind shift for people, because we can see election after election people will vote consistently against their best interests if they think it somehow screws their neighbor or puts more money in their pocket, never understanding that we're only as good as our weakest link. So this is going to be a real hard pivot for people, for some people,
Opt
to
out.
do.
Opt Out CA says people here in my rural area are expressing surprise that we've had a case, despite the fact that the city about half hour's drive away, to which so many people commute for work, shopping, and whatnot, has had cases for weeks. What? Yeah, we've been talking about that. Here's a question that's specific to you, Alexander. We've gotten slightly off topic here. I want to talk about what happened with the Senate or what's happening with the bill. But Mr. Decrypting asks, in the age of climate change, is it not a good thing that people are unable to buy plane tickets and fly places, um, fly places through, and that less people can afford to fly?
I see. This is the kind of thinking, and I don't blame this commenter for thinking this way, because it is a seductive line of thought. That the answer, that because hardship, leads to less economic activity and therefore less pollution, that ergo inducing misery or inducing hardship upon people is a solution to our imbalance with nature. This line of thinking has a very long history. It is often associated with Malthusianism. That we have a finite amount of resources on the planet, and that the most effective means of preserving them is to contain humanity. I I don't believe in this. I mean, I don't believe in reverting to periods where we had greater disconnection between people, where we had greater hardship among people, and where frankly there was a severe degree of suffering. There is another way. There are other ways that
Couldn't we have adjudicated the suffering without destroying the environment? That's
I
how
mean,
can
we can alleviate it now through a variety of means, and this part of what has been proposed by environmentalists and by some Democrats as part of this bailout program. They are calling for, specifically, the airlines are asking for a bailout, and in much the same way that in 2008, when we bailed out the auto companies, that ultimately came with regulations that forced them to lower their tailpipe emissions and increase fuel efficiency. The state of California wanted them to go further and mandate a certain amount of electric vehicles that were being produced, but the compromise was fuel economy stuff, and that was a big deal. And so people are saying now, okay, if we're going to bail out these for-profit airlines, why shouldn't we ask for something that is required for the public good? And airlines to presently make up about 3% of global emissions, but that figure is set to triple by the middle of the century. And in the past 10 years, fuel, as flights have gone up, as air travel has gone up, it has increased at a rate 3 times faster than fuel efficiency has improved for the airlines. You also have the fact that the airlines in that same period have pretty dramatically reduced their research and development funding into lower carbon jet fuels, into electric aviation, into a lot of these things that can make a really big difference. And now, for example, this isn't like an abstract idea that environmentalists are putting out there. The country of Norway, a major oil producer, but also the biggest per capita user of electric vehicles, has mandated that by 2040, all short haul flights, flights domestically within the country, have to be carried out by electric planes. Now, this is a nascent industry. There's a lot of testing that needs to be done, but there just needs to be more money that is directed this way. And in much the same way that we gave tax credits for buying electric cars, there are people out there saying, why aren't we giving tax credits to airlines for developing electric planes for short haul flights? So, there are many solutions that can preserve our modernity and can preserve our ability to travel and to see the world and to be with one another and to have to be able to see a relative and a loved one who may live on the other side of this vast continent that we have as one country, without and still preserve the climate. That there are there
Yeah, but we're here
it's
now.
not an either or.
Everything's closed. Shouldn't we seize the moment?
I mean, it's
Can
it's
I?
good. It's good to demonstrate what we can do when we
Yes.
set our minds to solving a crisis. That's for sure.
And I really want to go back to that last thing that you just said, taking things out of that either or mindset, that dynamic. Is I think human beings go to that very quickly. It's all or nothing.
Yeah.
It's either or. What if it's and?
Right. Right. And I mean, in this moment of misery and of uncertainty and anger with the response from our government, I mean, maybe that is the kind, it's like we celebrate this and mythologize this can-do spirit that, helped to mobilize the country to beat the Nazis and, pulled us out of the Great Depression and yada yada, did all these things that we're taught from such an early age to be proud of. And I'm not endorsing jingoism by any means, especially not on this show. but
Thank you.
but that idea that we are, this is a wealthy and vast and blessed country with a great diversity that it can draw from and wonderful universities, and you're telling me that we can't figure out how to reduce emissions and also still be able to fly to California and not have to take a car all the way out there? Come on.
I think we've been waiting for the quote unquote political will, but now we might not need to wait for the political will anymore. We might just get to do it. Can you connect the dots between climate change and economic relief for the corona crisis? Why should we be thinking about climate change in this moment? What's important about this moment? Seems like there's an opportunity for us here.
Well, the Senate last night passed the largest stimulus bill that has ever passed in the history of the United States, more than $2 trillion. That did not include a lot of climate provisions. We are, you know, there are a lot of people. There was a great letter that came out from a bunch of designers of Green New Deal policy who had advised Jay Inslee, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders' campaign on Monday, that was advocating that we should use this opportunity to, essentially spend that money on transitioning us to the kind of economy that we need to sustain ourselves and the kind of jobs that can provide a good good careers for people for years to come. Now, that doesn't appear to be happening, and it's worth noting that it's not a uniform idea among environmentalists. There are plenty of environmental economists who said, look, we have to we have to go into triage mode. We have to deal with this crisis as it is, and then we can deal with climate policy. I'm not particularly convinced by that, but this is a moment where we're spending so much money and we are, essentially bailing out for-profit industries that have been unable to cope with the current situation. And so, if we're using public money, why wouldn't we make demands of necessary public goods? And a
The
necessary
public
public good is the preservation of a safe climate.
Exactly. What were the demands that there was a letter that some climate folk put out on Monday? I'm not sure if that was the same thing that you were talking
It
about.
is,
Okay.
yeah.
So what were the demands that they were asking for?
It was lengthy. I mean, it was kind
Did
of
you
like
just say too long, didn't read? Did you just say that?
well, no. It too long to recount everything, and it was wish listy. It was pass all of the Green New Deal legislation that has come in so far, phase out fracking and offshore oil drilling.
Why
You know,
would they ask for that in this moment? That seems to be a bit far afield from like I could see maybe asking for things that have to do with, you know, uh, the airlines or the cruise ship industry, maybe just keeping that closed or whatever. Why don't they why go so far afield? That just seems like it gives a political it gives an opportunity for the other side, the corporate side, to say this is just politics. They're seizing on the moment to get their politics passed. Why not use the crisis as a specific stepping stone instead of
I I think that what ultimately was proposed in the House was more along the lines of what you just said. It was more targeted and specific. I think this, I mean, I'm not. This is by no means a defense of the strategy, but my understanding of the strategy would be that they want to start the negotiation with asking for as much as you can, and then let the other side talk you down to something significantly reduced from that. I'm speaking as somebody who has recently negotiated a union contract. That is part of the strategy. Ask for everything, including the things you will never get, because the ultimate thing that you will compromise on is probably the thing you would have asked for in the first place if you were being reasonable about your assessment of what you could get.
Many activists are now calling on the federal government to buy and nationalize the power industry, as many of the fossil fuel companies are in bad shape anyway. Is this the moment to do that, you think?
It's complicated. So, the nationalization debate, I think, has played out in various forms. So, in one area, there are people saying, okay, let's nationalize all the big oil companies. Let's bring Exxon and Chevron, and some of these other big producers under government control, with the idea that we will then, oversee a phase out of their production, and be able to use their vast resources for public good. I think that in the abstract is a compelling argument, but it's hard. There's no real model for that. There's no real there are very few examples that you can point to where that has been successful. And quite frankly, most of the examples historically that you can point to where oil production has been nationalized has not led to a reduction in oil production at all. It has led to the now government entity overseeing it to be incentivized to maintain production and bring that revenue in for its own purposes. So I think it is a debate worth having. And quite frankly, the idea that it would not be under discussion is an ideological choice. It's saying that I associate government takeovers with Maoism, and it has no place in this discussion. That's false. I mean, during the New Deal, the federal government took over a lot of companies and commandeered them, and that was that is as American as apple pie. But I'm not advocating for it, because I think it requires a lot more thought and discussion. Now, the more tangible campaign there, And the thing with more legs at the moment is that there have been movements led largely by the Democratic Socialists of America in various cities to call for the remunicipalization of utilities. So, you're seeing this in New York right now, where you have the DSA calling for, bringing Con Edison under public control. You're also seeing this on the state level over in California, where you have even high level progressive legislators like Representative Ro Khanna, calling for the public takeover of PG&E, the company that this week pled guilty to manslaughter for killing 80 something people in the California's worst wildfire in history 2 years ago. So that
Oh,
is that's something that has a little more argument to it. Now, I think it's worth parsing that out by understanding that there are kind of two arguments going on, and one I think is actually much more much stronger than the other, which is that you have people saying, oh, if we take these utilities over, we can more easily force them to shift from fossil fuels to renewables. That doesn't necessarily bear out. That doesn't there. If you talk to climate policy experts, they say publicly owned utilities are not necessarily that much cleaner than privately owned utilities. And the kinds of policy tools that you would use to enforce that are pretty applicable either way because of the way that these companies are regulated. Now, like, the moral argument about profiteering is a separate one, but purely decarbonizing, it doesn't necessarily bear out in the evidence so far that it is necessarily a faster way to decarbonize a utility. Now, the other argument is that when you see, in a crisis like this one, where we are asking, utilities to stop suspending service to people who can't afford it, that could a publicly run utility potentially respond faster and be more accountable to the public in a crisis like this? I can see that argument. You're removing the profit motive. The flip side to that argument too is that in a lot of cases so far, the utilities and power providers who have been reluctant to suspend cutting off service have actually been co-ops and publicly owned utilities, because they have less money to throw around, and the money they collect from ratepayers is what they use to get by. Whereas a more diversified, publicly traded company is able to have more access to credit, can borrow money more, and it's a slightly different situation. So I think the nationalization debate is a good one. It's one that's progressing, and it should. But I am not here to say that it is a panacea or necessarily a perfect answer.
what do you see that is happening from I see a lot of reports. Oh, the air is clean over Wuhan now. Oh, the air is cleaner over DC, and the clean air is cleaner here or there because of the Trump. Do you think that the stories about how just the week or month long, depending on where we're talking about, shutdown of commerce in this way is is being reported? Do you think that could have some effect in swaying people to see that sort of a large scale mobilization around the climate is possible, and the climate emergency, excuse me, is possible? And do you think that kind of talk will be useful?
It's hard to say. It's honestly
Seems like we're going to get to a point where people are going to be like, I want my trip to the Bahamas more than I want clean air for my asthmatic kid. Like we're at,
well.
it's not like a joke anymore where you're like, well, we could shut these planes down, but it would take months and years for it to clear out. Actually, it's pretty clear. It's
My
clearer than it has been.
my fear is that in that what that kind of data point may encourage is the idea that the only way for us to decarbonize is to essentially enact a form of environmental austerity, where we are forcing people, and let's be honest, like the people who will have this foisted upon them are not rich people. It will be working class people that we have to limit their ability to do things and their freedom to enjoy things, or limit the amount of electricity that they can use, or limit the where they can travel, and thinking in those terms, and thinking in terms of what we can do without, instead of what we can do instead. And so, my thinking on this is, okay, if you're pleased with that, then clearly the answer is to expand public transit. Don't make it harder for people to get places. Make it easier for people to get places without an individual combustion engine car. If you are concerned about airline, emissions, then we should be doing public investment into electric planes, but we should also be expanding high-speed rail so that it's an easy option to choose to take a low-carbon train and to travel that way. I don't want. I think it is a failing political project to propose that the only way that we can save, our environment is to, return to austere conditions of the past, which would only be more severe based on the fact that we have a larger population than we did then. So I don't think we should have to do more with less. I think we should do more with different tools.
So we are really at a turning point where now we're either going to go back to sort of where we were, or we're going to make decisions on whether we should pick up, the new and better tools. Is that about right? I mean, we're either going to try to go back to business as usual, or we have the opportunity to say, well, maybe we like this clean air. So as you said, perhaps more high-speed rail, perhaps less combustion engines, et cetera, in terms of the transportation sector. Do you see that becoming a pivot point in our national politics?
You know,
And how
there,
can we force it to become a pivot point in our national politics? Really?
I
I don't want to let this opportunity go by.
I think, well, you are in a unique position with a platform to keep people informed of that, and to share that perspective. And I think that goes a long way. And maybe it's naive, but I do believe in the goodness of people, and that if you arm people with the right information and with the right tools to imagine a different world, that they will want that. And
Yeah,
so
that's
I think that's the first step.
I just feel like the clean air that we're experiencing now is a first step in imagining something. Some people have a
Right.
paucity of imagination. It actually has to be in their hands first before they can see it. So, I love what you said about, well, if we want to keep this, let's just do the things differently. So I
Right.
see a lot of opportunity for the, to address things in the climate change, because again, just like with the Medicare for all, and that companies and the government, the Republicans, Sarah Nelson was on earlier on the show, she was talking about how the Republicans did not want to give certain workers health care lest they should get used to health care and then demand it. It's kind of the same thing now, like we're getting used to clean air and now we should demand it. I think it could be a very useful tipping point, and I'm hoping to push people over the edge, and I'm hoping you will help me do it.
I I also think it's identifying where people are responding from. Are they responding out of fear? Are they responding from hope? This will give you two completely different reactions. The fear is shut it down, go back, no, austerity. Hope is, this is nice. How can we get more of this? How do we do this better?
That's
How,
right.
how do we do the Alexander method of moving
Ah,
forward?
yes.
I mean, look, we were all here for 9/11, right? And we saw what came of that fear. And we saw
Mhm.
the discrimination that our brothers and sisters who are Muslim or look Muslim have had to
Mhm.
face as a result of that. We saw the expansion of the security state. And it's funny, like libertarians will come out to scream about giving people health care, or basic necessities, but spying on everybody in America, and putting cops in people's places of worship to make sure that they aren't up to no good is something that somehow they find tolerable. But uh, that, I think, offers a great example of a catastrophic moment that we were unprepared to find use from. And I really do hope that this is something that really jolts people, and makes people realize that the investment that we should make, and in out of this fear and out of hope, is in not necessarily a security state that can keep us safe from all the boogeymen, but a public health system that can address any crisis like this and help everyone, and help everyone in this country when they need it. We shouldn't have to make that kind of a choice. So I'm hopeful. I mean, I don't know what else to be but hopeful, because I think cynicism is a very privileged position to come from.
I think I'm hopeful also. I think this is actually a really big deal, and I think we need to point out to people that there are actually things for hope. I mean, the yin yang. There are also things to be horrified over, but there are things to be hoped for. And if we are at the end of human civilization, I keep saying I would like to spend my last days fighting for what's good and just, and to keep hopeful. So with that, I will thank you for coming on, Alexander, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Please follow Alexander on Twitter at Alex C. Kaufman, Kaufman, and follow his writing at the HuffPost. Stay well. I
You
will not
too.
see you until our next Zoom meeting, because I
Right.
won't be out there.
Nice meeting you,
Yeah.
Alex. You've been
You
great
too.
to hear.
You too. Stay
Thank you
safe.
so much.
Mhm.
Be well.